The Baha'i faith is one of the world's fastest growing religions. In less than 150 years, it has become the second most widespread religion on the planet. The Baha'is come from virtually every race, nation, religion, and creed.
Today, Sharon and John are speaking with their guests, Linda Kavelin Popov and Dr. Dan Popov, co-authors of The Virtues Guide. They've traveled extensively throughout North America, teaching parents, caregivers, educators, and others how to foster spirituality, self-esteem, and character in adults and children.
She can barely get
how
started.
How are our children at risk?
Physically, they are in great danger because about 60% of children and youth in our public schools go to school with weapons. And there's this great increase in budgets for schools of security guards and metal detectors and that kind of thing. But I think beyond these special challenges of urban children, really all children at risk spiritually, they seem to be sort of technical wizards, those that are advantaged, and moral incompetence. And I think it's very scary for parents.
What do you mean by that? That's
Technical wizards and moral incompetence. Please tell us what you mean.
Kids are, according to the Baha'i writings, these children that are born in these generations now are children of enormous capacity. And if that capacity, which is part of their qualities of soul, their sense of excellence, their determination, their imagination, their creativity, if that is not channeled and directed in a proper way, it gets diverted into material things which frustrate them. And so they may be focused on how are they going to make the most money, and maybe technically they can do video games and they can program a computer and all of that, and yet they don't know the first thing about honor or justice or kindness.
These are like essential character traits that you're defining.
Yeah.
You also have to realize that the Baha'i writings say that evil is not an active force in the world. It's the absence of something positive.
Right.
If you've got a child with a great capacity for patience or a great capacity for discipline, but they haven't had a chance to develop it, what you're going to find is a large amount of impatience, a total lack of discipline. And to the degree that they have the capacity for the positive force, if it's left undeveloped, it becomes a negative quality. Right? And that's just the absence of what's positive. No one teaches someone to be impatient. No one. Impatience is what happens when your patience runs out.
So the risk we're talking about is much bigger than just physical risk.
Yeah.
It's a broader topic than that.
Yeah, I think parents these days are very aware that their children are at risk, but they don't know what to do. And one of the reasons for that is that they are frightened of becoming authoritarian, and so they have sort of pushed away their role as the authority in the child's life, which is really an essential role.
Why are they frightened of becoming authoritarian?
Well, I think that a lot of people are coming out of dysfunctional families where authority was abusive. And they felt dominated, and there is a real epidemic of poor self-esteem in the parents of these children. And so they're trying to give their kids what they didn't have.
And so they're going on the opposite end of
That's right.
the pendulum,
Opposite-itis.
swinging.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is total lack of authority.
Well, the problem is that children really long for boundaries. They may not be aware of it, and they certainly aren't going to thank you when you always establish the boundaries, but they need them. And so if the parent does not provide that authority in a gentle and reasonable way, then the child becomes the authority.
Yes.
We call this show The Spiritual Revolution, and what I'm hearing is that from a Baha'i perspective, the revolution of the spiritualization of children is also part of the what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's rather interesting. If we can raise the children up to meet their full spiritual capacity, the world would be a different place in one generation. It's not that you have to put something in the child, it's already there in potential. Every child has the potential to be a very just, caring, considerate, courteous human being. This is in there. All you have to do is look at a little 2-year-old who feels that they've been wronged, and you will see righteous indignation, right? You will see them rising up and saying, this is not right, this is not fair.
Yeah.
that innate sense of justice is already there, but it has to be developed and it has to be channeled and controlled to be a benefit to the child.
Right.
And the channeling and controlling comes from the use of authority in service of the child. One of the things about human beings is, by instinct, we are not self-regulating, all right? By instinct, we're going to carry something as far as we possibly can, just to see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
All right, because
curiosity.
because we have free will, you know, it's kind of like, well, if I got away with this, could I get away with that?
Yep.
If I got away with that, how about this? You know, and there's not that real sense of too much. All right, that's where a parent has to step in and put the boundaries there and saying, you're getting into an area that it's dangerous for you. You know, and a simple thing, a parent saying, you cannot leave the yard. You're too young to cross the street, the busy boulevard, you know, to handle the neighborhood beyond. As the child develops and becomes more capable, more mature, more responsible, then the boundary has to shift as well. But it's that parent as the protector of the child, as the authority saying, here's what you can handle. Demonstrate you can handle more, and the boundaries shift.
One of my favorite quotes in the Baha'i writings is when Baha'u'llah says, we are mines rich in gems of inestimable value. And every child is born with those gems within them, the gems of their own virtues, their own spiritual qualities, which are the reflections of God within them. So a big part of the parent's job is to be a very effective miner with a light on to look for those gems and acknowledge them and honor them when they see them. Oh, that was a gentle way to treat your sister.
Positive reinforcement.
That's right. So
but you're
whenever
also
they
naming the actual virtue.
Yes.
You're calling attention to it.
Yeah.
And helping to reinforce it.
The language of the virtues is a very important way to empower a child's spirituality, because you're naming what you see in them. You're holding up a mirror and saying, that was a peaceful way to solve that conflict.
I see. Very
Or,
interesting.
you know, you're gentle, or I expect you to be just in this situation, not to be unfair to your brother. So how are you going to solve this? It can be a very firm as well as a very loving approach.
Actually naming the virtues. That's something I will have to remember.
Naming instead of shaming.
Well, the Baha'i writings, as in all religious traditions, say that we are created in the image of God. The image of God, one aspect of that is the human virtues. These are all our gifts. You know, that God is the all-merciful, but we can be merciful ourselves. And that God is, you know, absolute truth. We can be truthful. You know, that these are the things that are possible for us if we choose to act on them. And since we have free will, we must choose to be virtuous.
We'll pick up with that theme in just a moment. We're going to take a brief break.
There's a new world in the making. Won't you sing along with me? We are one family. We are too close not to let it be. We are sisters and brothers, a coat of many colors. We are one family. We are too close not to let it be.
People have turned away from religion. I think we've all noticed that. And yet there seems to be a resurgence of interest in spirituality and the soul. How would you explain that?
I think that there have been so many abuses in the name of religion that people are very turned off. You know, for them religion is pray, pay, and obey. And they just, I find in my experience working with people that there's a real fear of the authority of the church and so on, again, recapturing people's minds, and that it's a very dominant kind of system that people are just stepping out of. And my own belief as a Baha'i is that these some of the ways that religion is being practiced are outworn, but that the simple spiritual truths are eternal, and they are renewed every time a messenger of God comes. So for us as Baha'is, Baha'u'llah renewed that fresh spirit of revelation, just as Jesus Christ did, and Buddha and Moses and Muhammad and so on. And this age is one that is very alive with spiritual yearning and recognition because of the coming of Baha'u'llah, and because people are ready for the next stage in their spiritual evolution.
Both personally and sort of collectively.
Yes.
And as Linda pointed out earlier, it's not just the children of today that have the great capacity. All right? We were born in this day as well. And the emphasis of the faith on the independent investigation of truth. Now, I mean, just think about that in religious history. For the first time, basically, a prophet of God, a manifestation, has said, each and every one of you can recognize this for yourself. You don't have to be hand-fed. You don't have to have a clergy tell you what's right and what's wrong. You know, that these writings are accessible. Investigate the truth for yourself. And that just puts the dignity, and that puts the ability back down to the individual level, that each of us is able to decide for ourselves.
In other words, don't be a Baha'i just because we're your parents and we're telling you to be a Baha'i. It's basically the form of our education as Baha'is. We educate our children in all the religions, and they are to investigate the specifics of what it is to be a Baha'i and what the Baha'i faith is.
There would also, it seems to me, what you're talking about is the self-directed journey of the soul. And when we have the virtues, we begin to see the milestones or the key points along that journey.
But it's not just self-directed, it has to be guided as well, and that comes back down to the responsibility of the parents. You know, the parents' life experience says, this leads to success, this leads to failure. It doesn't make any sense to stand back and watch your child head for failure unless you're also going to be there to help them learn from the mistakes. The whole purpose of that parenting is to be an education, and the parents are the first educators of the children. If the Baha'i faith added anything to the science of education and child development, it is that the parents are not just caretakers. They're not there to make sure the kid is dry, warm, and fed. You're there to educate, you're there to guide, you're there to protect. You know, and part of the education, going back to Linda's analogy about the gyms, is that every rough gym, if you've ever seen a rough diamond, it's sort of a shapeless, greasy thing, you know, white. But in the eye of a diamond cutter, they look inside and they see the facets that are already there. And that the goal of the diamond cutter is not to take it and whack it into any shape that you want, but is to recognize the facets there. If I hit it just right here, it comes out and releases the inner light. I hit it this other way, it shatters.
Beautiful analogy.
Every child has potential. And the first task of the parents is to look and say, what has God put into my hands? I'm the steward of those gifts. I'm supposed to develop the strengths that are already there. I'm supposed to recognize them and then bring them to full fruition, you know, to work on them, and to allow them to release the inner light that's in every child.
How do we effectively empower our children to make moral choices?
Well, one of the ways is to recognize that they have the capacity at a very young age to make those moral choices. Most parents, any parent worth their salt, when a child comes to you with a moral dilemma, typically will resolve it for them. A child comes to you and says, you know, I saw my friend stealing something, I don't know what to do. And the parent will come up with some brilliant advice that does that child out of the opportunity to make a moral choice.
For them to choose for themselves.
Yes. And my view is, and it's very much reflected in the Baha'i writings, that we need to be spiritual companions to our children and support them by asking them questions. Well, what happened? You know, what was that like for you to watch that? What feels right to you? What do you feel would be right? Help your friend. What would that mean to you? Let the child make the choice. So it's a real respectful role that is given to parents.
You were saying earlier when we were talking about authority, I mean, it's authority balanced with the honoring of the child, which is just what you were saying. It's very important, very beautiful. As a Baha'i mother, I mean, there are still so many things that we're learning all the time, and it's fascinating to hear the way that you have put it all together.
Do you know, one of the things that really touches me is something that was said by Abdu'l-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, when he said, I'm paraphrasing, there's no such thing as a bad kid. He said, a child is born with a natural predisposition for certain things. Every child is both the light of the world and its darkness. How that child is trained in the early years will determine whether a special quality that child has is used or misused. For example, if a child is born with a lot of energy and wanting more things, more of everything, they're very energetic, they want more time with mommy, they want more stories, they want more ice cream, that can turn into greed if that child is mislabeled or abusively described to him or herself. Or it can become enthusiasm, leadership, excellence, if the parent names that and helps the child balance that natural sense of enthusiasm with courtesy and consideration. So the virtues being the focus of a lot of the writings about children, that is the main thing that the parent has to work with in bringing out the best of every child.
Very interesting.
How would you define, for the sake of our viewers, the Baha'i view on the purpose of life?
Well, my favorite definition, and there's a lot of wonderful passages from the writings about that, but my favorite is when Abdu'l-Baha was asked, what is the purpose of life? And he said 3 words, to acquire the virtues. And my own Sunday school teacher wrote him a letter when she was a little girl and said, why are we here? And he said, to acquire the virtues of the kingdom. So this is a journey, this earthly journey, that gives us all the tests we need, all the opportunities we need to develop those strengths that are within us that carry us through all of eternity. So that's one of the purposes of life.
It's a very intense one also. It's so simple. The meaning of life is to acquire the virtues, and it's true, the virtues of God. Give us a list of some of those virtues so we have an idea.
Okay, flexibility,
okay,
assertiveness, gentleness, peacefulness, truthfulness, honesty. Come on, help me out here.
And patience.
Patience.
We're going to take another brief break and we'll be right back.
Perfect.
A young man proclaims the advent of the Promised One. 20,000 of his followers are tortured and killed. The Bab is executed by a firing squad. A young nobleman, famous throughout Persia for his wisdom and goodness, is stripped of all possessions. Baha'u'llah spends the rest of his life in exile and imprisonment. He writes, "We desire but the good of the world and the happiness of the nations, that all nations should become one in faith and all men as brothers. What harm is there in this?" His crime, his claim to be the messenger of God promised by all religions. His mission, to unify humankind. Peoples from every nation have embraced his teachings, creating a new pattern of global community, a model for a peaceful world.
Dan, there is so much peer pressure out there for children of all ages, the teenagers as well as the younger children. What can we do to offset this peer pressure?
Well, we started off talking about children being at risk. You know, you're not going to eliminate the risk unless you walk with them to school, sit next to them in the classroom, and make every decision for them. You know, the sad reality for parents nowadays is they have to prepare their children to make the best possible moral choice for them. All right? You have to make them strong enough to understand. Right? If you don't, then children are going to go with the group because they want to belong. You know, they have to realize that their choices do make a difference. One of the great lacks in the world today, particularly among the young, is the real belief that it matters what they do. You know, there's so much despair, so much hopelessness that they basically say, it doesn't matter. You can do this, you can do that. You may as well do what feels right, or, you know, you may as well do what everyone else is doing because it doesn't make any difference. Right? If you give a child an understanding that if I choose this, here is what is likely to happen to me. If I choose that, here is what's likely to happen to me. This is what people are referring to when they talk about, well, the answer is education. The answer is enough, not only information, but enough spiritual grounding so that you know way down deep what's right and what's wrong, what's going to lead you into a problem, and is what is going to support you for the long run. We have to make children strong enough so that they can, you know, literally become the leaders of the group, or at least with the group be able to make an informed choice. I'm doing this for this reasons. I'm not doing it because I have to. I'm not doing it because everyone else is doing it. I'm doing it for these personal reasons.
I have to ask at this point, where does a consciousness of God or spirit come in?
Well, John, I would like to say that about the level of risk, it has a lot to do with a sense of God. And the place where a child gets that sense is from the family. And one of the things that must be revolutionary if our children are going to get out of this risk position they're in, is for families to start spending time with their children. Because the statistics show that, first of all, if there are two parents in the family, there is a much higher chance that the child's self-esteem will be strong and they will be able to make their choices with their peers. But whether it's a single-parent family or both parents are there, if the parent spends quality time with that child and sees the child and hears the child and is a companion to hear the pain they go through and the struggles, that child has much greater strength going out into the world and dealing with it from a position of strength. But it's when mommy and daddy just are not available that the real trouble begins.
And the sense of the sacred starts far, far earlier than most people realize. Baha'i writings constantly say, you know, teach the love of God, you know, commingle with the mother's milk, you know, early on in life. And if you really think about it from a psychological point of view, the first 2 years of life, you determine everything that's important in the world. You know, little children do this. You know, they sort out the dog matters, my brother matters, my sister matters. You know, my grandmother, who I've never seen, on the other side of the country matters. And how do they know this? Because, you know, whenever anything good happens, you know, mother says, let's call up grandmother, she has to know. All right, so that child learns that this is an important being in my life, even though I never met her and I know she loves me, you know, and all these things, and becomes excited about telling that. In the first 2 years of a child's life, if God is not mentioned, if you do not have an active prayer life, and by that I don't mean the child sitting there reading a Baha'i prayer, I mean being involved with, now we're going to talk with God, and that sense of reverence that comes. You know, even a child of 2 or 3, if you ask them to meditate, they will. Now, you don't say to a child, go and meditate. You go say, first you talk to God, just like when we're praying, and then I want you to listen for the answer. You won't hear it out there, you'll hear it inside. And every little child of 2 or 3, you know, I mean, they won't run up to you, but if you say, what did God say to you? They will tell you. I said this and God said that.
They're fresher and closer, and it's much more natural.
To the source.
And I think it's so foreign a concept because most people, I'm not saying most people, but let's say for Baha'is, it's okay for us to say that you can hear God speaking.
That's right.
And it's so refreshing, and they hear it, and they just want to know that grown-ups, exactly.
It's really true to a lot of religious disciplines. But I love this focus on the dynamic relationship with God. That it's a real thing. It's not something that's partitioned as a part of 1 day a week or even 1 hour a day. It's a dynamic, ongoing.
You know, children have a very natural sense of the sacred. And part of that is expressed in their sense of wonder. And to walk along with a child when he or she is loving the beauty of nature, and they see the smallest things that God created. They're so aware of the beauty in all of creation. Their sense of wonder is just a fantastic way to start. And the other thing is that they have a very natural sense of the presence of a loving creator. And so if that is a natural part of family life, it just keeps it alive instead of sort of killing it out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it can't be compartmentalized off. You know, there's that sense that God is always present, but think of the magic. If the parents obviously had a bad day or something bad has occurred, and the parents say, I'm going to, you know, turn to God, all right? And they pray or something, and they get up from that prayer, calm down, more at peace with the world, refreshed. The child looks and says, there is always help available. I'm never alone. All I have to do is turn.
Boy,
and
that goes
that sense of wonders, it goes a long way.
Wow.
And the thing we learn early in life become our foundation. We may depart from them later on, but way down deep, it's those things that we learned early on that are so foundational that we don't have any doubt that God's there, all right? There's just no doubt. If they're not there, all the rest of our life, the foundation is not laid well. All the rest of our life, we're wondering, all right? Is God really there? Boy, you know, sometimes I believe and sometimes I don't. But the things we learn in the first 4 or 5 years of life are so foundational that we no longer question them. It's always been true. Later on, we may rebel against them, but we don't question them.
It strikes me that parents, from this context, need to themselves get greater clarity about their purpose relating to God and to the world at large and to their families.
John. The writings, the Baha'i writings talk about the dynamic force of example. And if that child sees that the parent has a natural prayer life, that is just a part of the way they are, rather than prayer as performance. Let's do your prayer before bed. You know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. We're told to help children memorize, but it needs to be more than that. It needs to be real and genuine. And if the parent's relationship to God is strong and real and alive, if they take their anger to God as well as their thanks, the child is going to learn that too.
Yeah. The Baha'i writings said, constantly question, what is the best way to serve religion? What's the best way to serve God in this day? And Baha'i writings have invariably says, raise the children.
Yeah.
Raise the children, teach the children. This is the best way to serve God.
We'll be right back. I want to thank our guests, Linda Kavelin Popov, Dr. Dan Popov. I think you've helped us learn a great deal today about the definition of virtue and the role of virtue in parenting children, in children's self-definition, and the way that that empowerment can extend out to the world at large. It gives us hope for a better future for the whole planet. Thank you for joining us in the Spiritual Revolution.
Sisters and brothers.